Hello, everyone, and my dear subscribers. Recently, there was this podcast um, on this channel. It's called Boomer Gamer Kim. He's a pretty OG in the gaming industry. He has 410K subscribers, almost very close to 420K subscribers. He covers a lot of games, but he has a lot of insight and on a lot of games, especially with like RPGs, because I believe he's a WoW player as well as like Lineage. And this video, the podcast about Lost Ark, even though the video is 1 hour and 20 minutes long and it's been out for a day, the video already has 460,000 views. So what I'm gonna do is I have like a translated summary overview of the whole video. So I'm gonna go over it and share it. Um, as the guest, he invited Captain Jack and Kanyangi, Got Cat. He is actually a former Gunnesser in my previous static, and they both have ESO weapons. The subject, the title is, it says, incompetent or intended, about Lost Ark's current crisis. And it mostly covers about Lost Ark's current economy and if it's intended or if it's caused by incompetent management. Reason for the podcast was Lost Ark was considered one of the best MMORPGs in Korea for a very long time. But recently that opinion made a quick turnaround amongst almost every player base. So what happened? The video starts off by talking about how, with Captain Jack's opinion on why the game was portrayed as one of the god tier games in season 2, or until this day. Well, not so much until this day, but the game was portrayed as a good game because the players' judgments were very clouded. The problems were always there ever since season 2, but people didn't mind because they were having fun with the game. Too much fun to notice all these problems. The repeated system of implementing a new power source and after some time nerfing the system so casual players can catch up, like for example, a power pass and roll to blah 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 event, made it so that people who swipe in the beginning of the season or beginning after hard reset or soft reset, people who swipe, they lost trust in Smilegate to swipe in the future because later there's going to be these huge catch-up mechanics. This issue escalated with Season 3 launch because Smilegate introduced many sources of vertical progression for power, which were all obtainable with money. Swiping. As an example, Captain Jack, I think he spent probably over 30 to 40k USD to finish all the power system. And some of these power system exist. His Esther weapon, full engraving books, full level 10 gems, very good bracelet, and did I say accessories? Accessories. Economy, gold inflation, and etc. What is the cause of current gold inflation? Usually, in order to balance the gold value in a game, there needs to be a balanced supply of gold and gold zinc. So where did the problem occur? According to Godcat, both the supply and gold sinks were problems, but he said, I believe it first happened with the supply. In order to help new players, Smogit introduced Road to Hyper Awakening, which is a catch-up boost event, which allowed players to reach 1640 gear score very easily, and thus mass amount of 1640 characters were produced, printing gold from 1640 content rewards. Some of these might include the Behemoth 16-man raid and Echidna, and this also resulted in the what we call OPA service, which is basically a 1680 plus character brings a fresh 1640 character and provide a DPS bus. This lasted for a very long time until March 2025, which is almost 1 year. Question. So if Smilegate wanted to let more gold into the economy, there should have been a gold sink to balance the inflation. Were the gold sinks not enough? There were a few, for example. Accessory enchanting and karma system, but it didn't delete enough gold. The supply of accessory was very limited in the first place, and karma system cost about 600k gold per character, which is the gold you can earn in about 2 weeks if you have a couple good characters in your roster. And then it leads to economy manipulation. Recently, Smilegate had a live stream, and all of a sudden, the director said, in order to drive down the engraving prices, we're going to introduce Golden Frog in 2 hours after the live stream. So all of a sudden, just like that, boom, we had a Golden Frog. And this Golden Frog resulted in engraving book prices to drop significantly. It dropped from 340k to 200k. And this ultimately means that Smogate is intentionally manipulating the in-game economy by allowing mass production of gold and dropping the price of engraving books by implementing Golden Frog, which increased the supply of engraving books into the market by times 10. He showed a chart. I can't find it. Oh, where's the chart? This chart is, if I take a second to explain, swiping, no time. Not swiping, a lot of time. So A target is you can swipe but don't have a lot of time. B target is I can swipe a lot and have a lot of time. C type is can't swipe, don't have time. And D target is don't swipe but have a lot of time. So which player base is Smilegate focusing on? Like mentioned here above, C can't be target audience because they're usually not a target audience, especially in the case of MMORPGs, if they don't spend and don't even have time to play on RPG. B will stay and play the game regardless of what happens in the game because they can either grind because they have a lot of time or they can spend if needed. That remains A and D target audience. And looking at Smilegate's recent decisions, it seems like Smilegate is catering towards A audience, players who spend but don't have the time to play. For example, 6 character limit to earn gold is controlling D audience, right? Players who don't spend and has a lot of time. And to be frank, gold inflation is not necessarily bad for new players who are willing to spend, because that means if gold is cheap with the gold inflation, that means you can get a lot of gold when you swipe, and it'll be easier for you to catch up if you're willing to spend for the game. And Captain Jack's opinion on this is back in season 2, the D audience had more advantage because swiping wasn't very efficient. There was no gold inflation. It was better to have multiple characters just making gold. However, but after season 3 started, A, with this gold inflation, started having more advantage when playing the game. They also covered game entry barrier, which is a higher barrier for players to start playing a game, especially games like Lost Ark or MMORPGs in general. But in case of Lost Ark, is it higher barrier to make a bunch of ults to support for a main character, which could take a very long time? For example, making a 4-character roster, which could take around 1 year, or spending to skip making ults and make a playable main character. Right now, in case of Korea, this is probably easier to get into the game, right? Because people don't make new characters unless there's a new character event or a new class event that boosts your character up to a certain level with ease. And it takes time for you to set up your roster. So realistically, this is probably easier in Smogate's perspective. On top of that, speaking from the company's perspective, it's impossible to tell the difference between actual players and multi-boxers in the D target audience. D target audience, again, meaning players who don't spend and has a lot of time. So in conclusion to this, Smilegate probably does not want to encourage ults. They would rather have users who spend to play a few characters. In the global servers, there's a system called roster-bound gold. However, in Korea, they're going to implement character-bound gold in the future with new class releases, which means making ults less helps to funnel the goods to the main. However, Captain Jack thought otherwise. A new raid release gets old and boring pretty quick, and that's why Smilegate wants players to spend more time in the game by encouraging ults. People might have different opinions about this, but in response to this, that would be the case if people are making secondary character. Secondary character meaning like a second main. Like a second main you actually enjoy playing instead of just an alt that just prints gold for your main. But at the moment, there are more alts than secondary character, which means there's not enough resources that a player makes to support for your secondary main unless you swipe. Also, the reason why ults aren't very efficient is because Smilegate can't make the raids too easy. We don't have the Frontier nerf in Kara version. Reason being, first clear race, even though some of them are like unofficial, we only had one official race, which was Theomine, but still, we have, in the community, we still have these races when raids first come out. So for Smilegate, first clear for these new raid releases is one of the best ways to naturally promote the game. And even if the race is over, first clear race is one of the best ways to naturally promote the game because they get a lot of exposures and viewership, the streamers, content creators. And if the race is over too quick, it doesn't quite necessarily satisfy the promotion part of it, as well as players who participate in the race if it's too easy. Some people want challenging content, especially people who participate in the races. And because the raids are designed difficult, it would be very expensive for your secondary character to be doing the content later on. At the end of the day, all the problems which we discussed comes down to the game right now is too expensive. Also, another problem is unlike WoW, World of Warcraft, where you can kind of choose the difficulty of the raids you want to do, in Lost Ark, at some point you have to go through hard mode in order to make the progress. For example, a prime example would be Echidna. Echidna normal will give you advanced honing up to level 1 to 10. However, in order to complete advanced honing level 10 to 20, you have to do hard mode. That's also the case in Act 3. If you want to do advanced honing, eventually you have to do the hard mode in order to finish 30 to 40. And the topic moved on to talk about how the updates and patches in KR after season 3 release, it kind of stabbed the whale players in the back. First, it was the Essa weapon Ella Ella Hula situation, and then the engravings. For example, Smilegate deliberately tanked the price of engraving books after all the whales finished acquiring them. However, recently they announced something which impacts wider player base, which is the new gem system. But before we go on to the new gem system, chat, Bentley, stop typing in fucking Chinese, man. It's gonna be on my fucking YouTube. Guys, should I put my personal opinion in this or no? At the end? Okay. Okay. I have my own opinion on this part, which I'll talk about at the end of the video. Actually, I have my own opinions on a lot of this, and I'll talk about it towards the end of the video. Yes, the new gem system. A lot of players made duplicate characters in their roster to share the gems, in order to lift the burden because season 3 started really expensive. So it was very efficient for you to funnel your main character's gems to your alt that is the same characters because they share the same skills and everything. It was a very efficient way to play the game. And Smilegate let this happen for almost a year until they suddenly announced the gem changes, which is going to bind the gems, and binding gems will give you extra attack power depending on the gem level, 3 to 5%, which is considerable amount. Basically telling you basically telling the players stop funding the gems, right? So what happens to these duplicate characters that they made in season 3? It's wasted. Smilegate's reason for the change was to allow flexibility of the build on the character, which is an important step. However, this system is not complete without changing bracelet, engravings, and stones as well. Also, when there's a lot of vertical progression left to do, people are inclined to invest in the vertical power and not horizontal for variation. If reaching the power ceiling was cheaper and easier, this system might have worked. Also, if the gem changes were made along with the start of season 3, people would have been happy with the changes. There actually were a lot of people in the community asking for conversion between a DPS gem and CD gem, which is essentially the new gem changes. Yeah, the changes with the announcement of season 3, but Smilegate not kind of completely ignored this at that time. And the fact that they made unlocking the gems require blue crystals made it more clear that Smilegate has no intention of fixing the gold inflation. Because if they wanted a gold sink, if they wanted to fix gold inflation, they would have made this gold, not blue crystals. And the Godcat went on to say the biggest problem I see which is happening at the moment is Smilegate is contradicting themselves with the business model and target audience. It's obvious that a company wants to make money. So at the beginning of season 3, they introduced a lot of power system to make sales. However, after some period, they could see that new players were faced with a barrier because in-game items were too expensive and started manipulating the in-game items, started manipulating, directly intervening with the in-game item prices because they wanted more vast player base. Therefore, the people who already spent for power started feeling insecure about their investment in power, and this is causing everyone to just hold on to the gold because people don't know what Smilegate is going to do next. Next topic they covered was on the DPS meter. Because the power gap is too big at the moment, Smilegate is probably having trouble designing the boss's HP. Right now, there's a huge gap in power, even if the characters have the same gear score, depending on how many engraving book a character has, depending on the level of gem, and other power sources like accessories, etc, etc, etc. There's so many. But Smilegate probably can't make the race too easy because people who finished all the power system will probably clear the raid super fast. We talked about this earlier, the promotion part of it. Also, this will be a problem for Smilegate. If they can't make the raids too easy, on eye level players probably have to face some hardships when they're trying to clear a raid. This leads to raid fatigue and gatekeeping. People tend to look for different specs like engravings, gems, and etc. for gatekeeping because they don't want to fail the raid over and over again, and they want to clear it fast because it's become very repetitive and it's basically become a homework. And this has caused dying in Lost Ark this caused dying in Lost Ark become a huge burden on the player and the party members because because the DPS checks aren't so low. So in KR, there's a in-game culture where you must apologize as soon as you die in the game. This is probably going to get better with a resurrection system that they talked about, but still, But still, right now, people who are raiding and are scared of dying and don't want to apologize are just raiding safely without trying to do DPS because obviously they're scared to die, right? So people started asking for DPS meters to find the non-contributor who are underperforming in terms of DPS. And so the conclusion of this whole podcast was they covered a lot of topic, but at the end of the day, what this video wants to say is Smilegate is intentionally intervening with the in-game economy to tank some of the expensive in-game items, drive down the prices, and which is not a bad idea, which is a good step for a lot of for majority of players, for the non-whales, right? If things are cheaper, they're more affordable, and it becomes more accessible to more players. However, can they do this without pissing off the whales? Is there a way for them to do this without pissing off the whales or losing the whale portion of the population? That was basically the conclusion and the main subject of the video. Okay, well, from now on, I'm going to talk about my own opinions on some of these things that they discussed about. The first thing I want to talk about is how people who spent for all these powers already are getting backstabbed by Smilegate because Smilegate is all of a sudden manipulating the market, driving down the engraving prices drastically by a lot. Yes, they made an argument that it should happen naturally instead of Smilegate just pushing out a golden frog and driving down the price from 340 to 200k day one like that. Maybe it should have happened over time through just in-game supply. Maybe Smilegate could have just increased the supply in the raids or from cubes or whatnot. But still, I've already finished. If you look at my characters, if you look at my engravings, I've already finished Adrenaline, Grudge, Cursed Doll, Mass Increase, Keen Blunt. On top of that, I finished a couple other engraving books. Well, some cheap ones. I already finished before. Well, I didn't finish Keen Blunt before, but I finished Adrenaline, Grudge, Cursed Doll, Mass Increase before they released Golden Frog. And I'm still very, very, very happy that they tanked the engraving book prices because simply it makes it easier for new players. That's simple. I mean, it's an MMORPG. What does MMO stand for? Mass multiplayer online. It's supposed to have a lot of players. You're supposed to feel like you're surrounded by a lot of players when you're playing the game. However, when you cater to the top 1% or even less than that, 0.5% at this moment, I don't know. If you cater to the top 1% of the users too much, then what are the rest 99% of the players gonna do? Like what fun are they gonna have if things are too expensive? I feel like currently Lost Ark, because they started season 3 with a lot of power system, which are very expensive with limited supply, they should increase the supply at the same time. I think it's okay for the company to take drastic measures and I don't know, manipulate the market a little bit. I just want to be surrounded by players when I'm playing the game. I don't want Lost Ark to turn into a game that like 100 players play, where you play with the same people over and over again, regardless where you're pugging or playing with their static. So that's my personal opinion on the Golden Frog. Yes, I can understand that, if you bought it early, if you bought adrenaline books for 400k, I can see that you might get pissed off, but hey man, maybe you should, I mean, if you've been playing Lost Ark for a couple of years, then you should know how Lost Ark works. They usually, if you wail in the beginning, you always lose. Like when you spend in Lost Ark, you should be mentally prepared or ready for your in-game item depreciating or getting devalued. And that's what always happened in Lost Ark. Could have been better if Smoggy did it naturally. Could have been better if they just increased the supply in the game. Sure, but I don't think that introducing Golden Frog is a bad thing at the end of the day.